Hello, today's topic is narcissism and narcissism as a reaction to childhood trauma. So, childhood trauma, as you might have watched other videos, is this monarch programming that we all have as part of living on Earth. So, Earth is a game and a school, and as part of the game, we have these programmings, these conditionings, and the school is how we rise above it. So the school is the spiritual side. And narcissism, if you think about it in terms of the darkest possible version, is abuse. So the people that create childhood trauma can be labeled as narcissists, or the people that create trauma in society can be labeled as narcissists. But not all narcissists are abusers. And narcissism really is this deep self-hatred. It's the opposite of self-love, and it's trying to manifest in different ways, essentially, because the way to overcome narcissism is to feel your emotions. But that's the one thing that most narcissists cannot do, because they have been suffering from childhood. And this is as a result of the childhood trauma. So there is a huge link between childhood trauma and narcissism. And the only way to overcome narcissism and to break free from suffering and silence is to become the cycle breaker, to become Neo and start programming your own conditioning, reprogramming your own conditioning, essentially the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. So that's how you become like Neo from the Matrix. And what's really important right now is to start creating awareness around childhood trauma, around narcissism, and other complex conditions of the mind, of the psyche, of the inner world that have been created because of the dysfunctional society that we live in today. Because the Great Mass Awakening is happening so that we can return to ourselves, so that we can reprogram our minds, our hearts, and become more authentic, step into our soul purpose, because we all came here with a purpose. And narcissism and childhood trauma are blocking us from achieving that purpose. But let's look into the how childhood trauma manifests in adults. There are 4 archetypes. Stella, writer, and light worker, here to inspire positive change. So as I said, childhood trauma, let me hide this. Childhood trauma and narcissism are largely linked, but not all childhood trauma manifests as narcissism, and not all narcissism is a childhood trauma response. So the first thing to notice within childhood trauma is that childhood trauma is essentially your consciousness being blocked at a low level, at the level of a consciousness that a child would have, which is not very high. Because the child doesn't make these conscious decisions. The child listens to what is being told by the guardians. And because we have this repressed childhood trauma in society, we have a lot of adults that cannot raise their consciousness to the point where they can make conscious decisions for themselves, where they have removed the conditioning from their subconscious mind as well. So the first archetype in adults with childhood trauma is the high performance, is the high performer. This is the person that says to themselves in their subconscious mind, I need to prove myself. They have learned the lesson that they will receive approval, they will receive love, they will receive attention from their guardians as children. That the way to do that is through results, through performance. So these are the people that got A's in school, and they were encouraged to do that in order to get some sort of positive reinforcement. That's how they were conditioned, through positive reinforcement, or they got punished with negative reinforcement. So they were conditioned to perform well, to perform as a way to receive something or to avoid something. And they can be defined as the secret heroes in society because they deliver results. They are great at progressing projects forward. However, they tend to sacrifice their own emotional health in the process because they are off balance. They cannot process their emotions in a healthy way. So they avoid trauma in all means possible. They block their own emotions, and they tend to bury themselves in work. They are perfectionists. They focus on the results. They focus on their input, the performance, and they tend to get obsessed with the results as a way to showcase their value to the world, because they have been conditioned to believe that their worth is the results that they produce, which is couldn't be further from the truth, because we have inherent value within us that, just because a social media post that you created doesn't perform well today doesn't mean that you're not worthy of love. That's just one type of example. Or just because a project failed doesn't mean that you're not worthy of love. All of this is learning experience. All of this is teaching you things. This isn't um, life is meant to be a series of experiences, a series of lessons. And unfortunately, the conditioning of the high performer is that they don't feel worthy of receiving love if they cannot prove themselves worthy with results, which is a false type of conditioning. And they need to do their own inner child healing to change the narrative in their subconscious mind and get to the root cause. Was it neglect? Was it abuse? Whatever it was that happened in their childhood, early settings of the first 7 years. It might have been, the school system. It doesn't have to be the family. But yeah, this is the first archetype. The second archetype is the narcissist, narcissism. So they are a little bit more harsh than the high performer, because the high performer creates almost this bubble around them, and they would give the energy back to themselves. They would retreat back in hermit mode when they don't feel like they've produced enough results. Whereas the narcissist tends to project energy. So in their subconscious mind, they have this belief: I need to hurt others because they were hurt. And again, this might have resulted from neglect. This might have resulted from actual abuse. Either way, the psyche of the narcissist archetype remembers that somebody hurt them and they weren't hurt or they weren't seen. So now they need to inflict that pain. And it's automatic conditioning from their subconscious mind. So they become the real villain in society because they actually go into situations with this mindset. How much of it they are, in control of, that is debatable. Because if it's in your subconscious mind, you might not even be aware that this is your attitude towards life. You just meet new people and you have this at the back of your head, like, I need to hurt this person. So this is the kind of archetype that creates trauma. They project their own emotions to other people, and they bury themselves in creating an image around them. They get obsessed with status, and they get obsessed with money, very similarly to the high performer. If the high performer is obsessed with the results, and that's how they think they can earn the love of the people around them, the narcissist likes to show off their image, their status, their money, and they think that if they do that enough, if they raise their image to a point where people are impressed, that's them having earned the love, having bought their love, the love of their loved ones, essentially. But this is a fundamentally broken subconscious programming that needs to be changed internally. This is an inside job. Nobody can go into your subconscious mind and change it. And the first step is awareness. The first step is to understand what type of archetype you are going through as part of your childhood trauma, because childhood trauma always manifests as something, and it's like a coping mechanism. So what's interesting about the narcissist is that since they project their own emotions, they are likely to accuse you of what they've done. So in a traditional narcissistic relationship between a narcissist and a non-narcissist, the narcissist might accuse you of cheating, of lying, of keeping secrets, because they are the ones doing that. And this is almost done as a way of being honest about who you are, without actually exposing who you are, because there is a sense of vulnerability that must be protected at all times. You have to remember that childhood trauma, when it hasn't been healed within adults, they are still at the level of a child. So when they start to act in specific ways, like high performers or narcissists, they still have an inner child within them, and the consciousness, their operating system is that of a child. And so even if they are trying to hurt you, it's still coming from that wounded child place. Imagine you were at a playground as a child and somebody pushed you. You're going to go and push them back. Imagine you were pushed repeatedly for 5 weeks, and suddenly you come back to the playground. You think to yourself, now I'm going to start pushing other kids, other people. This is the attitude of the narcissist. The person that's experienced childhood trauma as a child, and now as an adult, if they haven't done the inner work to heal, this is their default attitude towards life. Then we've got the empathy as another, the empath as another archetype in adults. So this is the opposite of the narcissist. If you have the narcissist who wants to project energy to others and be like, I want to hurt others now, I need to hurt others now, and this is in their subconscious mind, the empath, they perceives this as their own mission to save others. I need to save others. Give me your energy. I'll hold it for you. I'll hold it for you. So they enter all these relationships, all these situations where they're able to spot and recognize this person was neglected, this person was abused, this person lacked understanding. So now I can give them the love, I can give them the attention, I can give them the care, I can give them the love. The problem is nobody asks them to do that. Nobody asks the empaths to be the parents that were lacking in these people's lives. But because the empath is dealing with their own inner childhood trauma, they are projecting their need to have been saved onto their connections, onto their friendships. So they enter these confusing situations where they somehow end up being the parent of a group. And it doesn't matter your age. Sometimes these empaths might befriend older people than them because they somehow have their life put together more than the older people. This doesn't relate to age. Again, you have to think about this. If somebody hasn't done the inner child healing, they are an inner child type of a consciousness trapped in the adult body. And so that's why people act like kids until they do the inner healing. And some of them never do it. They prefer to stay distracted. So the empath is really the wounded hero. They could do amazing things in terms of healing, in terms of helping other people heal, but because they haven't, if they don't do the inner child healing themselves, they became stuck in this mode of trying to save others. They feel called to save others, but they do it in ways where it's not called for. You save people, you help people save themselves. If you, as an empath, want to help somebody, you start to have conversations with them. You start to engage with them in a way that, you get to the root problem and start to ask them solutions to guide them. But to make it your own mission to go and save somebody when they haven't asked you for help, you're just going to end up in toxic relationships and friendships one after the other until you learn your lesson that childhood trauma healing starts with one's choice to heal. If a person doesn't want to heal, it doesn't matter what kind of people enter their life. They will continue to repeat the cycles until they're ready to start their own healing journey. And the reason I'm saying the empaths can help is that they have the ability to activate the trauma. So they are very in tune with their emotions. We operate on 4 levels. The first one is the physical. The second is the mental. So you can see that the high performer is very good at the mental level. They come up with all these ideas. They bury themselves with work. I would say the narcissist is stuck somewhere between the mental and the emotional, but never quite dedicated to each, because they kind of freak out when it comes to emotions, and then they come back to the mind games, but then their emotions bring them back. So they're in their own inner prison, back and forth between emotions and mind games. Whereas the empath is firmly rooted in their emotions. They can understand emotions, they can interpret the emotions very well. And that's why they activate the trauma, because they're able to speak to people's hearts in relationships. The problem is they take on others' emotions, and they kind of tend to carry the emotions for other people. And so they kind of lose themselves in life in the process of trying to help. They become kind of the martyrs of society. And that's where they buried their character. They bury their character under other people's problems. So oftentimes you see empaths that are exhausted because they've been carrying other people's traumas, other people's problems, because they almost need a reminder of somebody to kind of go to them and say, hey, did you know that your feelings matter too? And that is part of the healing process. And the final type is the victimhood, the final archetype. So if the narcissist pushes out their energy and they say, I'm going to create the trauma, I'm going to hurt others, the victim feels the energy. So the victim is a little bit like the empath. They take on others' emotions, but the way that they choose to use that information is, if the empath is saying, yeah, let me hold that for you, the victim is saying, oh, you're attacking me. Oh, I just felt your energy. You're attacking me. So it's just a coping mechanism once again, but this is the message that their subconscious mind is feeding them. I am always attacked. And if you're feeding this if this is your subconscious mind giving you that command almost, and you keep thinking that consciously, that you're always getting attacked, you kind of prove it to yourself almost. It's the victims are the covert villains, because they end up creating these hostile situations for themselves. They kind of enable the trauma because they possibly can see the situations that are not happening around them, but they try to make it around them. And the victims are it's quite dangerous to be around victims, because they don't know when the fun. narcissism isn't all born from childhood trauma, and not all childhood trauma results in narcissism. These are just coping mechanisms. And so now I'd like to kind of get your attention away from childhood trauma and focus on the narcissism in particular, because if you've watched the previous video that I did, let me switch the screens. We had these nine personas, the 9 game players, and this is kind of the operational mode that you can join the game of life with. So this is how you can start to see people around the world having these having their consciousness placed in one of these categories will help you figure out who you're communicating with, playing with. So let me go back to this. Okay, so narcissism, the first type of narcissism is the human with childhood trauma that's using narcissism as a coping mechanism. And their kind of subconscious mind is giving them that program. Let me see how fast I can attack your weaknesses so you don't see mine. So this is a way for them to hide their vulnerability. This is a way for them to project their energy onto you before you even have a chance to figure out what kind of energy they have. They want to dominate the narrative. So they're playing intentional mind games to redirect attention from their vulnerability. They don't want to be seen for being vulnerable. To them, being vulnerable is horror. It's the worst. And this is part of their childhood trauma because they weren't allowed to have that vulnerability. They might have been punished. It's just part of their way of interpreting what it means to be human, what it means to survive. They haven't been allowed to live. They're surviving. They're wearing a lot of armors to protect an identity, and that identity is still at the level of a child. So they haven't had the chance to develop a whole persona. There's a thick layer of self-hatred around their vulnerability. And in order to get to the vulnerability, there's a lot of healing that needs to happen. And unfortunately, this is something that the narcissist needs to choose to go through themselves. Nobody can do the healing work for them. You can love a narcissist, but if they're refusing to do the inner healing work, they'll keep hurting you because they're not functioning in a way that is controlled. Their subconscious mind is guiding them towards making certain choices and moving in certain directions where they don't even understand what's happening because it's automated programming, processing of information. And the first step is awareness. And the second is making the choice to heal. So some narcissists don't know they're narcissists. That's just their subconscious mind feeding them with this programming. I need to attack first so that they don't see who I am. But at the end of the day, narcissists don't even know who they are because they haven't gone through the process of self-discovery. They've never been allowed to be vulnerable, and authenticity and self-discovery require you to be vulnerable with yourself. That's the first type of narcissism, which is the human with the childhood trauma. Then we have the fallen angel. As I said, go and watch the previous live I did with the 9 types of game players. So we have a fallen angel, which is someone who actually knows who they are. So this is a very high consciousness. So they might be acting like kids, they might be acting like children, but their consciousness is already much, much higher than that of a normal human being with childhood trauma. And the fallen angel might still have childhood trauma because we're all going through the same onboarding process for 7 years, apply the childhood trauma, and then proceed into society. But the fallen angel is a lot more advanced in terms of their consciousness and in terms of their power, in terms of their energy. Their energetic field is a lot stronger. So their subconscious mind is feeding them this sentence: let me see how fast I can lure you into fully submitting to my will. So this is a little bit more difficult to beat, so to speak, because fallen angels are very charismatic. Human with childhood trauma who's using narcissism as a coping mechanism doesn't have to be very charismatic. That's just, That's just how they operate. They try to project things onto you. Traditionally, narcissists are all very charismatic because there's something about the dominance that they insert, the confidence that they insert, and that they portray themselves with, that is quite easy for you to trust them, or it feels easy for you to trust them, because confidence kind of inspires trust. Again, if you're dealing with a human with childhood trauma that's using narcissism as a coping mechanism, you already know that this confidence is false, because they're using it as a way to hide their vulnerability. With the fallen angel, narcissism is their default programming, unless they decide to rise to their full potential. So if you're dealing with a human with the childhood trauma, you're dealing with someone who uses reverse psychology, projection, but they will still engage in a very expected way. Let's put it that way. But if you're dealing with somebody who is very powerful in their ability to manipulate emotions as well, they will give you silent treatment. They will give you hot and cold. So one day they'll be very pleasant to be around, and this might go on for a whole week, and then they'll give you a week of the worst possible treatment you've ever seen, which will make you question your sanity. Does this person even care about me? And the answer is they might not, because what they're doing is they're playing intentional mind games to establish control and dominance. They're not trying to hide their vulnerabilities. They're not trying to hide their power. They are powerful. They are powerful manipulators. And once again, let me switch back to the other. So the fallen angels, they serve themselves. And the short answer is they probably don't care. They're here to be part of these environments of lust, temptations. They're here to submit to their desires. They are not really here to engage in these deep, meaningful relationships, friendships. They like the distractions. They like hanging around a lot of people as a way to keep themselves distracted, and as a way to kind of insert dominance in these situations, because they have a lot of power. They don't necessarily care if you are in their life today and gone tomorrow, because they're going to replace you relatively fast. But generally speaking, they like having people around them, and you can call them flying monkeys. But in their case, I'd say is they just like somebody doing the work for them, as in preserving the image for them as they rise in society. So when you're dealing with narcissism coming from a fallen angel in terms of the consciousness, the only way to really create some sort of change of heart within a person like that is for them to fall in love with you. But in order for that to happen, this is almost like a divine union. This is a divine event, and I don't want to say it's fated, but in order for somebody who's at the level of a fallen angel operational mode to have a change of heart and stop being a narcissist, they would need to fall in love and have that change of heart and choose to go through the inner healing and rise to their full potential, because their potential is tremendous. But they're choosing not to do that. They're choosing to not rise to their full potential because it's easier to manipulate people and get them to do whatever they want. So if you're dealing with that kind of narcissism, it's very unlikely for that person to change. And yeah, it can be quite traumatic to leave a relationship like that and understand that this person never truly loved you and appreciated you, because you were just a pawn in their game. Once again, you never know. This person might have a change of heart. They might grow better in the process of interacting with empaths, for example, or angels, people that have the ability to bring them to their level. Because otherwise, if you are just a normal player interacting with a fallen angel, they might choose to stay here because it's easier for them to manipulate you, but their consciousness operates quite high. So yeah, this is the second type of narcissism. The third type of narcissism is coming from a demon. So once again, go and watch the previous video of the 9 playing types, game player types on Earth. If you are dealing with a demon who's using narcissism or narcissism tactics for energy harvesting, once again, they're not going to change. You need to leave them if you want your life to change for the better, because their default programming is, let me see how fast I can get you angry so I can harvest your energy. And this type of narcissism can be spotted with the smirk. This is once you see it, it just gives you cold chills, because you might see your best friend getting you to the point of anger, and the moment that you explode, the moment that you react, you see this smirk that is very calculated, that is just, once you see it in the moment where your mental health is falling apart and the person in front of you smirks with this joy, you know that you're dealing with the demon. And I'm not necessarily saying that your best friend is a demon. I'm just saying that they might have demonic attachments, demonic energy attached to them. But it's not pleasant. And quite frankly, it kind of suggests that whoever you're dealing with that gives you that smirk, their own actions over the years have brought these demons to them, or they're just refusing to do the inner work. It all comes down to, we all have childhood trauma. Now all of us are choosing to heal from it. And if you don't choose to heal from the trauma, you kind of add coping mechanisms over the years. You add drinking, junk food, reality TV, junk programming, TV programming, porn addictions. These are all types of very low energy, and this is the domain of the demons. Demons cannot operate at very high frequency. They need very low energy, and anger is very low in terms of frequency. Anger and fear, they're kind of similar. So if you're dealing with a narcissist that kind of incites you to be angry and shows you this smirk, you're dealing with a demon. You're not even dealing with the human with the childhood trauma. You're dealing with the demon. And they're playing intentional mind games to manipulate you and get you to act out of character. Why? Because when you act out of character, you release more energy, and you release more of the dark, more of the lower frequency energy. And that's how they feed. They feed off your energy. So if you have friends that are always getting you angry, that are always getting you in, let's go and beat them up, let's do something, like always kind of lead you towards violence, you're dealing with some demons in a human form or energetically attached to them. If you look at this, let me close this for a second. So you've got the fallen angels that serve themselves. They love the distractions. They love the temptations. They love the lust. So that's very clear indication of narcissistic patterns. And then you're dealing with the demons that love the gossip, the drama, the illusions, the lies. So again, narcissistic behavior of creating illusions, creating false images. And anger and violence is just another mode of narcissism. So yeah, this will help you recognize what kind of narcissism you're dealing with. And then there is a fourth type, which is very interesting. So this is the hybrid programming. And the hybrid programming kind of gets created when you have a human with childhood trauma, and over the years, they cannot rise above their circumstances. If you're a narcissist, a human with a childhood trauma that develops narcissistic behavior patterns, and you kind of get used to projecting your emotions, you never do the healing work, and you get labeled as this you get labeled as a narcissist, and essentially you've already branded yourself as a narcissist. People don't expect anything more from you than that, but you're rather successful in your life, let's say. So you say, okay, well, that's as good as it gets. That's kind of, your conscious mind is operating with your subconscious mind, and they're concluding on behalf of you, this is how good life can get. And over the years, you add more coping mechanisms. So narcissism is just the starting point. You add the alcohol addiction, the drug addiction, the junk food addiction, the porn addiction, and so on and so on and so on. And all of these low level frequency addictions, behavior patterns, they attract demons your way. Like every time that you drink, you lower your frequency and you're more susceptible for energetic attacks, especially if you're drinking in the pub, especially if you're going to football games and everybody's getting angry and rowdy. These are the perfect places for demonic energy to get attached to you and to follow you throughout your life. And this is the hybrid programming where we have human with childhood trauma with demonic attachments. And essentially, you're going to see a lot of this if you start to analyze dysfunctional family structures. Their subconscious mind is almost feeding them this kind of line of code. Let me see how fast I can create my own army of minions. And this is done in terms of the subconscious mind. This is almost unintentional, because at some point, humans with childhood trauma that don't do the inner work, they're operating on autopilot. And especially when they have some sort of attachment to them that is of demonic nature, they're operating on autopilot, but they're being driven to the worst possible behavior, and they're acting out of character, because this is exactly what the demons do, the demonic energy. I'm going to get you to act out of character. So let me recap. You're a human with childhood trauma. You're refusing to do the work. You want to hide your vulnerability. You're stuck somewhere between the mind and the heart. And the mind is kind of pushing you to keep creating these false scenarios around you, to keep preserving the image, because it's not okay for people to see your vulnerability. Whereas your heart is saying, show your emotions to the world. The world cares about your emotions. So you're stuck somewhere between the mind and the heart. You drown your sorrows with alcohol. Demonic attachment gets attached to you. And one day, that's just life. That's just life for you. And you get a partner, life partner, start a family, and all of a sudden, you start to play these unconditional mind games to control other people's lives, because you're out of control in your own life. And this is all done on a subconscious level, and even beyond subconscious level, because if you have something attached to you that's pushing you to do things that are outside of your own free will, and you don't even understand how your own subconscious mind or conscious mind works, this is beyond the subconscious mind. So this is how you have the system currently that we live in, the matrix life, operating on its own, because they have already created the childhood trauma. The childhood trauma is there. They have already created this perfect environment for people that are stuck within dysfunctional patterns to get stuck in different areas of life or different distractions. And unfortunately, this is how a lot of families are creating childhood trauma, and they are further pushing people into one of these 4 archetypes. It's we need to face the truth. We need to create awareness before we can heal. And there's a lot around childhood trauma that is now coming to the surface in terms of information. There's a lot around narcissism that is now coming to the surface. And you're going to see a lot of videos talk about spiritual warfare, and that narcissism is spiritual warfare. And to a degree, I agree. It is spiritual warfare when it comes to specific types of narcissism. And if people don't do the healing work, if people don't do the self-discovery, they cannot rise to their authentic self, and they are not in control of their life. And once again, people are very powerful. Like, everyone is so powerful when they discover who they are. And the only way to do that is to do the inner work, to overcome the childhood trauma. And the first step is awareness. And when there's so many distractions, it's very hard to create that awareness. When there's so much mass media programming that creates mind control, it's so very difficult to create that awareness, because the sources that you trust for information are false. It's a beautifully designed system, but it's a corrupted system. And I hope you found this useful. I will be coming back with more live streams in the upcoming weeks. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to see a particular area analyzed. Thank you for watching. And if you have any questions, leave a comment after we end the stream.